Hey folks, I'm Jesse with Ponybox Woodshop, and today I'm going to make a very simple wooden box with mortised hinges. Now don't let something like mortised hinges scare you away. They're a lot easier to install than they sound, and I'll walk you through each step. I started by picking out some figured maple and cut it down to a more workable size. After cutting off the rough edge at the table saw, I cut the sides to length on the miter saw. Make sure on this step to cut the sides in order so that you will have continued grain pattern around your box. I set the boards upright on the workbench to get an idea of how tall I wanted the box to be. Once I had my measurement, I went back to the table saw and I cut the box sides to final width. After that, I laid out the boards on my bench and numbered them for easy referencing throughout the build. At the miter saw, I cut an oversized piece of 3/4 inch walnut for the top and bottom panels of the box. Over at the bandsaw, I resawed the walnut in half. Air dried walnut is hard to come by, so I didn't want to waste any of it. I brought the walnut to final thickness on the planer and then set the panels aside for later. After setting my table saw blade at 1/4 inch high, I cut a dado at 3/8 of an inch from both the top and bottom edge. This will be repeated for each side of the box and are for the top and bottom panels. Since the walnut panels are a little bit wider than my table saw blade, I adjusted my fence slightly and made another pass. I made small adjustments until I had the perfect fit. Once the fence was locked in the correct spot, I then ran each of the side pieces through to cut the dados to the final width. Next up, I laid and secured all the pieces on my workbench and sanded them to 180 grit. I'll finish sanding them once the box is fully assembled. Back at the table saw, I set my blade to cut a 45-degree angle. I screwed a fresh board to 2 miter gauges and made a cut. Now I can align each of my side pieces and cut perfect 45-degree angles without really taking any of the length off. This is by far my favorite way to cut miters for a box. Laying the side pieces in order and face down, I placed painter's tape over each of the joints. Make sure that the tips of each board are touching and the top and bottom edges are aligned. The tape will now act as a hinge and make assembling the box a breeze. By doing a dry fit of the box, I was able to ensure that it was square and get an accurate measurement for my top and bottom panels. Don't forget to add the 1/2 inch makeup to these measurements. Now, the panels can be cut to final size and the box can be assembled with wood glue. I added some clamps with light pressure just to ensure that my miter joints were good and snug. A few hours later, I removed the clamps and tape and set my bandsaw fence to 1 inch from the blade. I designated which end of the box I wanted to be the top, and then I ran it through the bandsaw. I laid out some masking tape on my bench and used CA glue and accelerator to secure a piece of 100 grit sandpaper. I taped down the edges and then used it to sand out the bandsaw marks on the box and the lid. This will take out the marks and keep each edge nice and flat. Next, I used my Monotool mini chamfer bit to make a slight chamfer on the outside and inside edges of the box. I think that this helps define the top from the rest of the box, and I just really like chamfers. This mini chamfer bit has a very small guide which allows it to get the chamfer deeper into the corners of the box. I then cut a chamfer on the outside and inside edge of the bottom of the lid, and finally on the outside edge of the top of the lid. Because of the 3/8 inch height, I couldn't use the chamfer bit on the inside edge of the top, so I used a chisel to create a small chamfer to match the rest. I finished the sanding with a 220 grit sandpaper sponge until the entire box was nice and smooth. Now for the thing you've been waiting for, the hinges. Hinges used to be intimidating, but with practice, they get a lot easier. I used a marking knife to outline the hinges and penciled in the lines so that they were easier to see. I set my trim router with a 1/4 inch straight bit and set the depth to half the height of the closed hinge. Then I used the router to remove most of the wood, but stopped just short of my line. Then I used the chisel to finish removing the waste. After that, I repeated this step for the second hinge and for the top. To make this job a little easier, you can use CA glue and accelerator throughout the process to hold the hinges in place while you mark or assemble. I'll put a direct link to my bio for the glue that I use, as well as all the other tools and products that I've used during this build. Using a self-centering bit, I drilled pilot holes for each of my screws and drove the screws in by hand. For this little project, I wanted to keep the finish simple, but use something that would really bring out the figure in this maple. I ended up going with shellac. It was easy to apply and really looked great. I applied 3 coats, and man did this thing turn out nice. I even think that the wormholes added a nice uniqueness to the box, as well as the awesome figure. If you found this video helpful and enjoyable, please let me know by hitting the thumbs up button. If you want to see more of my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting the bell to be alerted when I post a new one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.